Mortal Kombat goes back to its roots with Mortal Kombat 1, a fresh reboot that delivers some of the most striking visuals seen from a fighting game to date. Lighting quality, materials across its detail-rich stages, and motion capture are all brilliantly, often gruesomely realised on Unreal Engine 4. And while this is not using the latest tech of Unreal Engine 5, the turnout still impresses for a 2023 title. In fact, Mortal Kombat 1's target platforms speak to the significance of its visual overhaul from 2019's Mortal Kombat 11. This time, developer NetherRealm Studios focuses its efforts on PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X and S. There's no last-gen PS4 or Xbox One release in other words, but in a surprise turn, a Nintendo Switch version has still been made. The porting duties to Switch are handled by Shiver Entertainment and Saber Interactive. It's not cloud streaming, there are no tricks here, it's all rendered natively on its mobile Tegra X1 chipset, and to cut to the chase, at release, this Switch version of Mortal Kombat 1 sadly has issues in visual polish, in being a stable 60fps experience, and even bugs. Let's kick off then with the Switch version first. Right now, it costs £60 or $70 on the Nintendo eShop, just £5 less than the PS5 or Xbox Series X versions at launch, which is the main point of contention really. Given the frankly huge compromises to its visuals and wavering frame rate, which we'll get to, it's not an equivalent experience for the cost. In terms of install size, MK1 on Switch takes up 35.3GB, up against 114GB on PS5, which is quite a drop, down to well over a third of the space. Now, this is achieved, in large part anyway, by dropping the bitrate and resolution of its story mode's pre-rendered cutscenes. And at least there, we have some good news for Switch, because as pruned back in quality as it is, this version is feature complete. In terms of modes, it has parity with PS5 and Series X in bringing the entire single-player story with all cutscenes included. We get online play, we get the full roster of characters, and its gameplay is identical in its mechanics. Right down to the new cameo moves, it translates to Switch, letting us add assist characters into a combo by pressing the right shoulder button. Let's get to problem number one then. The Switch release, at launch anyway, has issues in lengthy load times and also unresponsive menus. Kicking off at the title screen, selecting the local versus mode takes Switch 15 seconds to get to the character selection screen. Now on PS5 or Series X, we'd usually get a seamless transition with two combatants walking in from the screen's edges. It's a stylish idea that takes us right through to the battle itself. On Switch though, every character takes time to load after selection, and as Switch attempts to load your picked character, the menu itself becomes sluggish. The selection cursor starts to hitch, making it hard for poor player 2 to also make their choice. And after you've finally picked your two characters and stage, the real wait begins. Your two chosen fighters just hang in this awkward, long elbow press. And say we load the Hourglass stage, it takes Switch a further 40 seconds from here to get to the action itself. It's a huge wait, and to a large extent this is expected. It's never going to be a match for Series X, for example, which comes in at 6 seconds in the same test, but still, it's another hurdle to actually getting into a fight. So now we're fully loaded up, what about the visual downgrades? Comparing Switch to PS5 for example, the first point is of course the drop in native resolution. Docked Play on Switch runs at a dynamic 756p, that's 1344 by 756 max, while the lower bounds come in at 576p during more GPU intensive stages. Honestly, this is par for course on Switch. There's obviously no competing with PS5's many times more powerful GPU, which affords it a dynamic 4K setup scaling down to around 1800p. Interestingly, Switch runs at its peak 756p in intros and fatalities, where the frame rate caps at 30fps. And, in fairness, this is also a higher resolution range than the 540 to 720p we had in Mortal Kombat 11 on Switch. The payoff being, by comparison to PS5, yes, it's a significant hit in image quality, but relative to most Switch games, this is what we'd expect for it to target 60fps. And of course, portable play on Switch drops that resolution range even more so, down to a dynamic 720p, while its lower bounds come in at 704 by 396. The good news there being Switch's smaller screen does actually help disguise the lower pixel count. Resolutions aside then, the drop in visual settings across the board are impossible to ignore. In fact, it's perhaps easier to describe what hasn't been pruned back from the PS5 version. Comparing these two consoles using the Living Forest stage, every facet of Switch's visual makeup is touched upon. We have low-grade textures, while texture filtering takes a hit. The polygon count on models, plus the geometry in the background, is visibly dropped in complexity. Meanwhile, foliage is stripped out, or otherwise Switch uses a simplified plant or tree model. Effects are also removed or culled in resolution, often dulling the impact of special moves, and on other stages we even see screen space reflections are removed across the floors. Really, the list goes on, and the extent of the cutbacks here is similar to what we saw in Mortal Kombat 11. The result is still recognizable. In essence, it's a mobile version of the game, though it's impressive how deep these visual cutbacks go. You'll even notice the lighting model is altered, for example, and so shadows are stripped out from the background, while character shadows project at a different angle on Switch. But then, on certain stages like the Hanging Gardens, shadows are removed entirely from characters during fights. It's a huge upheaval on Switch then. The question is, to what extent are these visual cutbacks acceptable? And does it truly affect the experience of playing it? No doubt, the texture quality in certain stages, like the Hourglass, is glaringly low even for a Switch port. It's a distraction to see entire surfaces, like rock formations or the mosaic floors, appear as a blur, behind much more sharply defined characters. Also, it's a shame to see background characters, like Sindel on the left of the Great Hall, no longer animate at all on Switch. Expect a lot of static elements like this in the background, with NPCs frozen in place. Interestingly though, and to Switch's credit, cloth and even water physics are kept enabled, while select plants and trees also animate properly. Physics are less extensively applied then, at times they're simplified, but still it's a surprise to at least have some physics-based details making the cut on Nintendo's handheld. A final point on Switch's cutscenes. Mortal Kombat's presentation, its motion capture on PS5, Series X, S and PC are expertly delivered by NetherRealm Studios as always. Sadly though, facial capture details do not translate well to Switch. Full body motion capture is intact, but the most glaring issues relate to missing character mouth and eye animations. You'll notice that they're just static at points, creating uncanny moments during in-engine cutscenes. Worse still, there are numerous visual bugs during intros, fatalities that tend to distract as well. See how the animation of Reptile's jaw is out of sync with his teeth on the Switch version. That's not even to speak on the loss of motion blur and depth of field, but the animation itself is broken right now on certain characters. Likewise, even the story mode has clear issues, with flickering shadows across characters right from the very first fight. Plus, you'll notice bouts of tearing and even hitching during pre-rendered scenes on Switch, which is likely a CPU contention issue as Switch loads the next stage behind the scenes. All round, this Switch version simply lacks the level of polish to justify its price tag. And given Mortal Kombat's core appeal is so tied to its presentation, it's clear Switch misses out. For the full package on console then, PS5, Xbox Series X and S are the ones to go for. We already know where PS5 stands, and on Series X, we get the same exact setup. A dynamic 4K with drops to 1800p as the lower bounds. And to be clear, every visual setting is precisely the same between the two consoles otherwise. It's only on Series S that we see any real visual difference. In comparison, image quality is dropped on Series S, with it resorting to a dynamic 1440p, lowering to 1080p during GPU-heavy moments. But it does go further. In switching between Series S and X, note how textures are lowered in resolution for points in the background. Likewise, shadow quality takes a hit. In fairness, it demands a 3x zoom to catch, and this is still absolutely a great experience on Series S. It's only minor points that take a hit, like the dropped foliage quality in this shot, or reduced decorative elements like petals. Otherwise, you're getting much the same experience across all three consoles. Moving on to performance, the state of PS5, Series X and S is best summarized as a solid 60 FPS in gameplay. Even with 4 characters on screen, that is 2 combatants and 2 cameo fighters, it barely drops a frame from 60 FPS on any machine. Great news then, and the fact is even Series S is cut to 1440p, with a drop in select visual settings, gives us a watertight 60 FPS too. It's exactly what we'd expect. The only downside, as is the trend with 3D Mortal Kombat games, is each console caps to 30 FPS during intros, fatalities, and outros. This jump, this transition from 60 FPS gameplay to 30 FPS scripted moments is still jarring to see, and interestingly, this half refresh allows each to push for higher settings. Each console runs at its maximum res target during intro cutscenes, for example, so we get 4K on PS5 and Series X or 1440p on Series S. Also, depth of field and camera-based motion blur engaging these moments, plus additional shadow maps are added in cutscenes across the background. So this frame rate switch does ultimately have a purpose in pushing better, crisper visuals where the game needs it. The setup might not be to everyone's tastes, but the upside is we do get 60 FPS where it counts in gameplay. Jumping over to Switch next, this is the make or break moment. For all its visual cutbacks, and there are many, the payoff must be in getting 60 FPS locked down. But alas, Switch really doesn't deliver. First impressions are pretty sobering. The intro cutscenes jump between 10 and 30 FPS, complete with big frame time spikes down to below 200 milliseconds. It's a juddery, uneven experience from the word go, and most glaring of all is that Switch actually hangs momentarily. The camera freezes for several seconds on a fighter after they deliver their one-liner, and it stays put until Switch is ready to load the next fighter. And then the combat itself kicks in. Here, the frame rate unlocks to 60 frames per second, but the fact is Switch has huge issues keeping this locked down, with bouts of play often plunging down to 30 FPS and even into the 20s. The typical baseline performance is at 55 to 60 FPS, but the problem is, huge dips happen often, usually coinciding with cameo assists. In other words, all it takes is 1 or 2 cameo characters to be summoned on screen, and the frame rate immediately takes a nosedive. In the end, the new mechanic of Mortal Kombat 1 is the bit that tanks Switch's performance. Unlike PS5 or Series X, actual gameplay is prone to suddenly running at 30 FPS as a result, midway through a combo, not just cutscenes. The net result is, it genuinely affects playability in any real competitive sense. All of this applies directly to Switch played in portable mode as well. Visual settings are broadly the same as docked play, besides the resolution drop, but clearly performance struggles with a wavering 30 to 60 FPS and even under. There's really no skirting around the issue that, played docked under a TV or as a portable, Switch needs much more work to get it into a more playable state, and right now, it's hard to justify its high price tag. Overall then, and despite all its visual cutbacks, the disappointment with the Switch release is that there's no payoff for playability. The performance as it stands at release is very poor. Oddly enough, this stands in contrast with the Switch version of Mortal Kombat 11 back in 2019. MK11's visuals were stripped back in every respect, yes, but it still ran closer to 60 FPS than this year's entry. There were no sudden lurches to 30 FPS mid-combo. Jumping back to Mortal Kombat 1 today, the level of optimization, the balance between visuals and performance is just not on the same level. Fortunately, series creator Ed Boon has at least mentioned in a BBC interview that he's looking to address the Switch issues in a future patch, but for now, for the price, and given its sluggish menus, long loading times, bugs and poor frame rates, it is one to avoid. None of this should discredit the excellent work that's gone into the PS5, Series X and S release, of course. Honestly, the game's a blast to play on any of those consoles, just take your pick. Gameplay itself is a rock-solid 60 FPS, and each avoids the visual bugs of the Switch release. To enjoy the story mode as it's intended, to see the fatalities in all their bloody glory, there's truly no wrong version to go for here. And as a fighting game, Mortal Kombat 1 yet again sets a high bar for quality in its cinematic presentation that, for newcomers and longtime fans, is well worth checking out. But that's all from me today. If you did enjoy this video, feel free to like or subscribe, and don't forget to hit that bell for instant notifications as any new video lands. To get a high quality version of this video, check out our Patreon at digitalfoundry.net, and to get in touch directly, you know where to find me. But from me today, thanks for watching.